The land stretched endlessly, a vast desert painted in shades of copper and red, as the late sun pressed low against the horizon. The wind dragged across the plains with a lonely whistle, carrying with it the smell of dust, mesquite, and the faint smoke of distant campfires unseen. Elias Turner rode slowly, his body tired, his horse even more so. Each creak of saddle leather seemed louder in the emptiness around him. His life had become this, endless days of work with no one waiting at home. He had once imagined the ranch would be filled with laughter, with the clatter of dishes at supper time and the patter of little feet rushing out the door to greet him after a long day. Those dreams had died along with his wife Sarah and their boy Samuel. Fever had taken them both within weeks of each other, and Elias had been left standing in a silent house that felt less like a home and more like a tomb. Years had passed since then, but the ache never left. He spoke less, worked more, and lived as if each day was something to be endured, not experienced. The sky burned orange as he guided his horse along a narrow trail. He thought of nothing and everything all at once, drifting in that fog of solitude he had grown used to. Then, something shifted in his vision, a darker shape against the trees, something that did not belong in the natural rhythm of the land. His eyes narrowed, his instincts sharpening. Out here, anything unusual could mean danger, and danger had a way of finding men who thought they were safe. At first, Elias thought it was just a broken branch or an abandoned coat caught in the wind. But as he drew closer, his breath caught in his chest. Hanging from one of the mesquite trees was a figure, small, fragile, swaying gently with the breeze. He pulled on the reins sharply, his horse snorting and stamping the dirt beneath its hooves. Elias dismounted in one swift motion, his boots crunching on the dry earth. It was a girl, no older than 12. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders, swaying like a curtain as the wind moved it. Her arms hung limp, her bare feet dangling, lifelessly. Around her neck was a rough rope, tied carelessly, as though whoever had placed her there had wanted only to leave a message, not finish the work. His eyes moved to the wooden board strung against her chest, crudely scrawled with thick black strokes of charcoal. "White man don't forgive." The words felt like a stone dropped into Elias's chest. They were not just a message. They were a curse, an accusation, a warning carved into wood for all men like him to see. For a moment, Elias stood frozen, his mind rushing back to the old stories, the raids, the blood spilled between settlers and Apache, the vengeance that had passed back and forth like wildfire across these lands. His own brother had died years ago in a skirmish with an Apache hunting party, and the bitterness had never fully left him. But staring at the girl, Elias felt no triumph, no justice, only a sharp pang deep inside. He rushed forward, his knife flashing from his belt as he cut the rope with shaking hands. The girl crumpled into his arms, limp and pale. For a sickening moment, Elias thought he was too late, that whoever had left her here had done more than just tie her up. But then he felt it, a shallow rise and fall of her chest. She was breathing, faint but steady. He lowered her gently onto the dirt, brushing the dust from her face with hands that trembled more than he liked. Her skin was warm, her lips dry, her eyelids fluttering faintly as though caught between the pull of darkness and the stubbornness of life. Elias pressed a hand to his forehead, trying to think. Why would anyone do this? Leave a child like this, hanging, marked like a warning sign. The board's words echoed in his mind. White man don't forgive. Perhaps she was meant as bait, perhaps as a cruel message from her own people, or perhaps from settlers trying to set the fire of vengeance ablaze once more. Whatever the reason, Elias couldn't walk away. His horse pawed the ground behind him, restless, sensing the tension. The air around the mesquite tree felt heavy, thick with history and hate, as if the soil itself remembered every drop of blood spilled upon it. Elias looked down at the girl again. He didn't see an Apache. He didn't see an enemy. He saw only a child, fragile and lost, abandoned to a fate no one deserved. Kneeling in the dirt, he whispered words he hadn't spoken in years, soft and raw, as if speaking to his own son again. Easy now. You're not alone. Not anymore. The desert wind carried his voice away, but in that moment, Elias felt something stir inside him, a crack in the hardened wall he had built around his heart. And as he lifted the girl into his arms, carrying her back toward his horse, the loneliness that had weighed on him for years shifted, replaced by a question that cut deeper than any loss he had known. What would happen now with this girl in his care, and that sign's bitter words still burning in his mind? Would you like me to expand Scene 2 also into 750, 800 words with dialogues and Elias's inner conflict so the pacing stays cinematic and emotional for your channel? You said, expend Scene 2 without heading in 750 words. ChatGPT said, Elias carried the girl against his chest as though she were made of glass, her small body light yet heavy with the weight of what had been done to her. His horse shifted uneasily as he mounted, and for a moment Elias hesitated, glancing once more at the tree. The rope still dangled from the branch, the crude sign swinging back and forth like a pendulum. It was as though the land itself wanted to remind him. This child was not meant to survive, and if she did, she carried a curse with her. The ride back to his cabin was slow and tense. The girl stirred faintly, her head pressing against his chest as though she were trying to resist, the world pulling her under. Each shallow breath she took reassured him she was still alive. Still, doubt crept into his thoughts. Why had he intervened? Why hadn't he left her there to fate? He knew the risk. Harboring an Apache child could bring trouble from both sides. If settlers discovered her under his roof, they would call him a traitor, a fool blinded by pity. If her own people discovered she had been saved by a white man, they might see it as an insult or worse, a claim of ownership. He clenched his jaw as the memories of his brother came unbidden. Thomas Turner had been just 23, ambushed, while driving cattle near the mountains. Elias had buried him with his own hands. Since then, every whisper of Apache raids had stoked a coal of anger in his chest. And yet here he was, saving one of them, though she was just a child, untouched by war. When he reached the cabin, the sun had dipped low, shadows stretching long across the plains. Elias pushed open the door with his shoulder and laid the girl down on the rough-hewn table. The cabin was sparse, more a shelter than a home, but he kept it clean. He lit the lantern, its warm glow spilling across her face. She looked so small under that light, her dark hair tangled, her skin marked with bruises along her neck and wrists where the rope had dug in. Elias fetched water from a clay jug, dipping a cloth and pressing it gently against her forehead. Her skin was hot, fevered. He muttered low under his breath, not knowing if he was talking to her or to himself. Hold on, little one. You've still got fight left, I can feel it. As he worked, he found himself thinking of Sarah. She would have known what to do, how to comfort the child, how to bring her back with soft words and a tender touch. Elias's hands were rough, better suited to fence posts and reins than tending wounds, but he tried. He wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, lifted her head carefully to let a trickle of water pass her lips. She coughed weakly, and that sound, fragile but alive, stirred something in him that had been long buried. When her eyes finally fluttered open, they were wide and filled with fear. She gasped and tried to shrink back, but her body was too weak to resist. Elias held up his hands, speaking softly, the way one would to a frightened horse. Easy now. Easy. You're safe here. She did not understand all his words, but his tone carried. Her lips moved, dry and cracked, and she whispered something he could not catch. Her language was unfamiliar, but there was one word he heard clearly, spoken like a plea: Ahyoka, her name. Elias repeated it gently, tasting the sound carefully so as not to break it. Ahyoka. Her eyes flickered, some part of her recognizing that he had heard her, that she was seen. He watched her drift back into unconsciousness, her chest still rising and falling with the rhythm of fragile life. That night, Elias did not sleep. He sat by the fire, rifle propped beside him, staring at the sign he had taken down from her neck. White man don't forgive. He turned the wood over in his hands again and again, as if the truth of it might change if he looked long enough. The words echoed in his head, dragging up old scars of blood and betrayal. But then he looked at Ahyoka, bundled in blankets on his cot, and the anger that had long been his companion felt misplaced. She was no warrior, no enemy. She was a child caught between two worlds of hate. What sort of man would he be if he let her die because of sins she had not committed? Still, fear gnawed at him. If the settlers came, they would call him a fool, perhaps even hang him for siding with savages. If the Apache came, they might see her in his cabin and decide he had stolen her. Either way, he was a man marked for trouble. But Elias Turner had lived alone with ghosts for too long. He realized as he sat there, staring into the fire, that he no longer feared death as much as he feared the silence of his own home. Saving her was not a choice. It was something his soul demanded of him. Back at his cabin, Elias tended her wounds, feeding her broth and wrapping her shoulders in his late wife's quilt. The girl whispered her name, Ahyoka, her voice trembling like dry leaves. Days passed, and slowly she began to trust him. She carved small figures from wood, sang Apache lullabies at night, and the lonely house began to breathe again. Elias found himself speaking aloud more than he had in years, as though she had drawn him back from the grave of silence. But danger loomed. Riders came one morning, white settlers who had seen the sign and wanted vengeance. "Hand her over," they demanded, "or you'll share her fate." Elias stood tall at his door, rifle in hand. His voice was steady. "She stays. I won't let hate decide her life." For the first time in years, Elias felt something more than sorrow, purpose. The lonely rancher who had once lost everything now had someone to protect, and in the bond between a grieving man and a broken child, forgiveness began to grow where hatred had been carved in wood. A lonely rancher, Elias Turner, haunted by the loss of his wife and son, discovers a young Apache girl, Ahyoka, hanging from a tree with a sign that reads, "White man don't forgive." Though torn between old grudges and compassion, he saves her and brings her to his cabin. As he nurses her back to health, Elias struggles with memories of bloodshed between settlers and Apaches, including the death of his brother. Yet caring for Ahyoka awakens something he thought he had lost: purpose, hope, and even tenderness. When settlers arrive demanding he hand the girl over, Elias refuses, choosing to protect her despite the danger. In doing so, he breaks free from the cycle of vengeance. Their bond transforms his lonely cabin into a home again, proving that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the past, it's about choosing a different future. In saving Ahyoka, Elias finds redemption, and in trusting him, Ahyoka finds life.